FPAC 2015-2016 annual report to the school board. So I'll hand it off to our friends, to Ms. Hogan and our friends from FPAC.
Good afternoon, and we're delighted we're going early, and I hope you get done early today. I have a lot of slides, but we're going to try to go quickly. I would like to introduce, just because you probably don't know him, Dan Amanoff, who's our vice chair, and Charlie Hookey, who's our secretary, and Alan Griffin, who is our Fairfax city representative. So we have an agenda where we're mostly going to spend our time talking about the results of our charge for this year. So whoever's changing slides, if we could go to 4. This year you gave us a charge that had several components to it, and as we go through the recommendations, I'll talk a little bit about what we considered as we looked at those sections. So the first one on slide 5 is about the capacity issues, where you asked us to look at the near-term sort of 3 to 6 year capacity issues that we all thought were going to be just looming, and that we would have to do something really fast to make some adjustments. And as it turns out, the numbers are showing that we're not growing as fast as we were. And our recommendation is that we have another cycle of the CIP and the numbers to take a good look at it and see what's really going on. We had brought you 2 recommendations at our mid-year report with using the proposed EDD Specs to get those actually incorporated and into use for the renovations and any new construction that comes up. I think that's being worked actively under Dr. Garza. We suggested also that in the CIP we report the brick and mortar buildings separate from modular and other kinds of buildings that we use. And then we've added 2 new ones to review the entire EDD spec every 10 years, give it a good scrub and make sure it's still current. But we know that on a more frequent cycle, the EDD specs are modified as they need to be as we go along. But we're saying at least once every 10 years we really look across the board at the EDD specs. And then this is one that's created a little controversy in the community, but we're suggesting that all boundary options be vetted and considered before we decide on new construction. And as you know, the cost of new construction, the availability of land, all of that is really challenging for us. So we want to make sure that we use all the facilities that we have before we go and put something on a bond issue for new construction. This does not apply to things that have already been vetted or things that have already been taken to the bond issue. So there's some question about whether the Route 1 elementary school is something that we were had in our crosshairs as we were talking about this particular topic, and no, it's not. This is going forward. So new decisions about new buildings, putting money in the bond cycle for new construction, we just need to be careful. We're also suggesting that we add some language both on the boundary locator site and in any communication that has to do with facilities. The first sentence is already there. The second sentence, it says, further, FCPS provides no guarantee that any school will continue to offer the programs currently offered. We think that that needs to be made clear, that just because something's offered at a school today, it's not. It's kind of implied with the academic centers being included in the first sentence, but it doesn't clearly state that you have the ability to move programs around as needed. And people should not assume that that's going to be the same forever. Second part of our charge for the year was to look at incorporating and prioritizing capacity enhancements in the CIP. And as we said at the mid-year report, that's already been done in this year's CIP. We've included the capacity enhancements in the spend plan so that people can see where those are going to occur and how that impacts the rest of the renovation and other activities that are included in the spending plan. And it gives us a more realistic view of the expenditures and shows the impact on the renovation schedule. So we're happy that's been done. The third area was to look at the reuse of our former school buildings. And in our report in attachment 2, you'll see a complete list of all the sites and locations and buildings that we could come up with. We have a list of 28 locations. Most of them are former elementary schools and some vacant land. We have over 265 acres. Most of those are not very big chunks, but we have a lot of acreage in total. Currently, those buildings and acreage serve about 800 students and about 500 FCPS employees. So clearly, there's some opportunity to make use of those resources. And our recommendation is that that be done as we flesh out the comprehensive facilities plan that we're working on with staff, and that those facilities be incorporated into that big picture strategic look at how we use our resources. So the recommendation is that we further develop the analytical tools that staff have to enable decision-making regarding costs and ROI. And we know that you're looking closely at ROI in other areas and return on investment for whether we use a building for staff or for a school or for some other purpose. We should have the tools at hand to make those decisions. Fourth area of our charge was to look at the facilities comprehensive plan and continue work on that. Actually, I think it said to complete it, but that's a big challenge. It's even bigger challenge for staff because they do most of the work. So we've been working with staff and looking at what we would like that to eventually be. And where we're headed is similar to your new website. It would be a web-enabled interactive presentation of the data and the documents so the community could ask questions and find answers and look at data and understand what's going on. And that would be publicly available, easily accessible, and easier to maintain and keep current. So we're working with staff on that. We're looking at some of the other school systems that already have interactive websites with comprehensive plans on them, and we'll be continuing that work in the future. As part of that effort, our members are going to be contacting you during the summertime to find out from you how the CIP could be improved and what else you would like to see included in the comprehensive plan. So as you are contacted, please understand that that's kind of what we're doing, and in September we're going to put our heads together and see what we have learned from the school board. Our recommendation there is to continue that work next year. In addition to our charge, we had a couple of other areas that both you and we were interested in looking at. The first one was the impact of the Tysons development on our schools. And we had one member in particular who was very interested in digging into the comprehensive plan and the documents that the county has and doing some analysis to see what things look like. In particular, whether the projections for the housing types that the county was projecting we would have were reasonable in terms of student yield, or was it something that was not rational? And when she went and looked at both what the county is projecting and what other jurisdictions in the area, like over in Arlington, where we see some of the same kind of development that we have in Tysons, the result was that the numbers looked like they were reasonable for the projections. So that's good news for all of us at this point. The comp plan, the county comprehensive plan, calls for 2 new elementary schools, and we have 1 site set aside at this point. They're also suggesting the reuse of Pemmit Hills as an elementary or a middle school. And they're saying that the surrounding middle and high schools may have to be expanded to accommodate additional students. I'm going to show you a map in a minute. We'll look at what that means. But our concern is that it's not clear to us that these middle and high schools can be expanded to accommodate the 800 or so students at the high school level and 500 or so at the middle school level. And the comp plan amendment that is currently being considered increases the capacity of the schools to the numbers that are shown here. Elementary schools to 950, middle schools to 1350, and high schools to 2,500. And we know you've had discussions about school sizes. We want you to be aware that this is going on at the county level, and if there's some way that you want to weigh in on that, if you don't think it's right, our message is to just make you aware of that at this point, not that we think it's wrong numbers. When we look at the Tysons map, what the planners are expecting to see is in the very center of a sort of a donut ring thing, there would be the office buildings. That would be surrounded by the next ring of retail, and the next ring would be housing and residential. And you can see that the schools, which are the little circles, are kind of on that outer ring. And there's a number of schools that could be affected by the growth in Tysons over time. One elementary school is going to be needed by 2030, according to the projections. And as you know, that's not very far away in terms of bond cycles and CIPs and construction. So we really need to be thinking about what we're going to do with that in the near future. The high schools that are in the area, McLean and Madison, are pretty landlocked in terms of their ability to be expanded. So this sort of casual comment from the county planners that the high schools could be expanded to accommodate 800 new students over time may be something that we should be looking at more closely. The biggest message that we have with all of the growth that's going on in the county and the redevelopment areas is that while staff is engaged with the county planners, a lot of the information comes in bits and pieces. So as one residential area is under consideration, that's considered, and then another and another. And what we really need to make sure that we continue to do is take a big picture look at each of the areas around the Silver Line and Route 1 and Tysons, to look at the whole thing so that we're not surprised when it all comes together that we have more than what we thought through the individual pieces. So our recommendation coming out of that look at the Tysons development is that we continue to engage with the county planning efforts on that, and that make sure that the comprehensive plan amendments that are ultimately adopted are consistent with your policy and direction, and that we have adequate school sites provided for our projected students. Second area where we were curious was whether the county has, within its own self-imposed constraints, the ability to maintain its bond rating and still perhaps have a little bit more money available for bonds and for paying for those. So we had another member who was very interested in looking at that from a financial perspective. She dug into all kinds of things, and what she found out was that in each of the areas that the county considers, there is some flexibility, there's some room. So bottom line is that if the county wanted to, they could use their thresholds and still allow us to have more bond money funded through the bond process. And with the $87 million that we need additional to continue to keep our schools on a renovation cycle that we would like them to be on, it's critically important that we do that. In the midst of the process of looking at those areas, and the details of this are again an attachment to the report, but when you look at the details of that, we saw that the county executive had this spring recommended that the Board of Supervisors may very well need to take another look at the bond levels and the funding levels that they're approving, and decide whether they could actually raise the cap. So we would encourage the school board to engage actively with the Board of Supervisors in that area and support the county executive's thought that we need to look at that and perhaps increase it. And it doesn't seem to pose any particular threat to our bond rating. We just have the flexibility. We just have some caps that the county has set. We had a couple of other areas that came up during our retreat. The first one was we had a presentation on the DoD schools and how they were looking at designing their schools for the 21st century. And their big thing was that they're not just schools, they're community centers, which is something we would like to see, but it's in the terms of overseas military communities, you can understand that it's even more important for them to have this community center for their military families. But they also designed round and rectangular classrooms with the teacher at the center, so rethinking kind of how education is done and presenting learning kiosks throughout the buildings. So after we heard that, we met with Dr. Presidio at our May meeting, and he talked to us about some of the needs that he sees in the Fairfax County schools for 21st century learning. So next year, we're going to be pursuing some of those areas that he presented to us. And the second area from the retreat was that we had one of our members who had participated on the Wyoming statewide assessment of school security. And they're way behind us, but it was interesting, you know, kind of how they went about assessing all of their schools and then funding the improvements that they needed to make. So our curiosity was piqued, and we asked Tom Vaccarello, who's the FCPS Safety and Security Director, to come and talk with us at our March meeting. And we were delighted to learn that we have a very impressive array of safety and security things going on in our facilities, and we didn't hear any red flags that we need to bring to your attention. This slide talks a little bit about suggestions for our annual charge for next year. The first three are pretty much continuing what we were working on this year. And then it adds to a look at the effectiveness of facilities-related energy savings and green initiatives. We'd like to see where we stand on that as a school system in terms of the facilities, and that we look at the, any recommendations that we can bring to you regarding the 21st century schools and the needs that our school system has in that regard. In conclusion, we'd like to thank Kevin and Amy in particular for all the help they've given us this year. They've been very sharing with data and maps and ideas, and they've really helped us to understand what the things are that we're looking at. And we're really excited about the new projection systems and the data collection and data analysis that the school system has now. And as we move forward and can look at data from different directions and can bring you some recommendations that are data-driven, I think that we'll all be in a much better position. So I'd like to really say thank you to Dr. Garza and her team for making that possible, because it will really enhance our work. So thank you very much.
Karen, thanks again. Every year your report is so thorough and well documented. It's incredible. I have Ryan, Sandy, Janie, Megan, and Ilyang.
Okay, well, thank you, FPAC, for another wonderful report, and it does look like everyone's getting along now, so that's a good thing. I know that helps in producing productive reports. So can we go back to the map slide? Yeah, the Tysons map. So in looking at this, you know, you have number 5 up there. I think this is the first time the board has been presented with this. I don't think we've ever been told the location of this elementary school, so this was a surprise to me. Can we get a little more information about what building this is in, or what location this is in?
I'm going to ask Kevin if he would mind. I know it's our report, but in terms of the, or Jeff, either one, but. Yeah, sure.
For you right there.
Yes. We did.
Actually, yeah, it's West Park, Office Park. Right now, there's 2 turf fields, a full field and a smaller field that are located on the road. So it's kind of across the street from I think it's Fannie Mac, Freddie Mac. I mean, I don't know. I don't do loans, but so there's a 2.5 acre area in front. One portion of it has there's an office building that's going to close. They have a new grid system in Tysons that has not been constructed yet. So the school would fit in between the fields and this road, which is on the west side. I'll see if I don't have a map, but we'll try to create a map and send it to you all.
Probably something vertical.
It will be a little over 2.5 acres. When we first looked at this property in 2010, that's where my office, we actually created a schematic design for a 5-story elementary school with a turf field. I didn't want to say that out loud, but a turf field on the top floor of the parking garage. That's the only way to
And
make it work.
was this presented by the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission? How do we know that's where it's going to be?
Yeah, this actually this request came through the Board of Supervisors and the Tysons Task Force. So we had it, right. Yeah, they have a copy of it.
Currently, it's labeled parks and schools.
Park/school.
Okay, well, if we can, as information comes available, please keep us apprised of that. Thank you.
Sandy.
Yes, thank you very much. Excellent report and excellent work this year. A few questions on your recommendations to have the separate brick and mortar showing capacity. I believe we've talked about this before, and I think, did we decide that that's going to be reflected in the next CIP?
I don't think we.
Or has that been decided?
I don't think we showed it separately. We showed temporary buildings separately, but we didn't show it in this way. Is that right, Jeff?
And is that something that you would welcome doing, the bricks and mortar versus the modulars, basically? Yeah. I'm looking for a response from.
Question is, what do you think about that?
Last year's CIP actually had modular separate and trailer separate, and we had the quantity of classrooms. Now, if you want us to calculate capacity with that without a modular?
Well, I'm asking you to
Yes.
respond to their recommendation,
Yeah.
so.
We did have it by school as well.
Okay.
What Sandy wants to know is, would you accommodate that recommendation? Do you think it's a good recommendation to separate out the numbers that are currently in trailers and modulars versus the brick and mortar?
Remember, trailers are not counted toward capacity. Modulars are, because those are actually funded through the capital program, so they're counted differently.
Right.
Question is if we have trailers as well, even though it's not considered as part of the capital account, if I understand this correctly, would it be prudent for us to identify that as being utilized for capacity, annotated that it is not a capital funded element? I know Mr. Moon has been pretty consistent. In fact, in the public session, if you'll recall, when we had the discussion about Goal 4, he did bring up once again the discussion that he wants to have about trailers and so forth. We have provided a report on that did break out based upon, I think, a couple board members back when he had brought this up, that delineated some of the details of it. But the long and short of it is really, as Mr. Moon constantly reminds me, is we've got to have a plan for getting rid of trailers. And that plan, I think, is consistent with the meals tax and consistent with gaining more funding for our CIP, advancing it. We have been, Dr. Garza has been pretty stern with us about making sure that where we can, firm, I should say, about where we can remove trailers, not starting firm, excuse me, but to remove trailers where we can, because they're a cost. And when we're looking at the finance and the budget and everything as a comprehensive school division, those costs that we keep going, even if we build additions on schools, if we don't remove those trailers concurrently, then we lose the opportunity to save on utility costs, custodial cleaning areas, and also the expense of the trailers.
Well, I would like to see something on trailers, but their recommendation actually is separate capacity for brick and mortar and modular units. Are we already doing that now? Do we have that in?
I mean, we can do it. We list the quantity of classrooms within each of the modulars.
Oh,
I mean,
oh,
the question is,
But this is capacity.
right, but of course, yeah, because, I mean,
Okay.
the modular is considered a permanent fixture as opposed to a trailer. So then, once you have the unit there, it's actually part of the school.
But we also do move modulars.
Well,
Occasionally,
yeah,
not too
I would
often,
prefer
but-
not to. Right.
All
Yeah,
right,
let me
yeah.
try and take a crack at it.
Okay.
So what it is, it's the way the design capacity is, as Kevin indicated, a modular is considered part of the actual permanent brick and mortar structure of the building. But we want to, in the interest of transparency, we want to know how many kids are being educated outside of the main brick and mortar building, and you can't see that now the way the numbers are indicated in the CIP.
So is that something that you would consider doing? for the
Well, I
next
mean,
time
because
around?
really, based on that, what Dan just said, you would look at both modular additions and trailers.
That would be all right.
Which, yeah, that's possible to do. We can put a number to it for certain.
Okay, great.
I'd like to just add, though, I think it's really critical how we manage that message, because I wouldn't want to suggest that, and I understand we all know this, but as that document has continued to evolve, and we've gotten a lot of compliments about it, I think we have to really caveat the distinguished components that, in fact, Kevin mentioned here. You know, modulars are capitalized. They're funded through capitalized dollars that are indebted over the period of time of the payback and pay down that debt. Trailers are not. And the reason why, and we have some modulars that when you walk through the building of the school, you don't know that you're in a modular because it has a brick facade on the outside, except for a little bit of the flooring that you can hear. They have bathrooms, et cetera. So I think it's not a problem necessarily of discerning to get a comprehensive picture of what we have out there as an outgrowth of making it the document full of all the information. But I think how we set that up and how we phrase that to make sure the integrity that I think Kevin's trying to maintain.
But I hear what you're saying. I think there are some cases, though, where it's not, you don't just go from the one to the other. I think about Glen Forest, and so that's a very different situation where we have a lot of people outside in modulars, even though the core space was built for something else. So I would find it valuable to know what the core space was originally built for. So I'll just make that pitch there. As far as the ed specs, what's the status currently of the ed specs?
Well, we're currently under review. We were talking about that. In fact, Susan was asking us about that again early today. Mr. Sneed and his staff finished that up sometime last year, towards the end of the fall, and we've been taking a look at how we need to, what parts of it the individual questions that he needs asked in there. We've been taking a look at those, and we're going to be getting together soon. So we have copies that have been distributed, and now there have been a few things going on, but we do have it at the point where we need to identify some of the questions and answer those before we can bring them forward.
Okay.
So it's getting in the short rows, as they say in farming terminology.
Okay, that sounds good. As far as the, thank you for your recommendation on increasing the bonding authority. You know, that's something that we have been wanting to do. And so I see your recommendation on slide 14 is to increase the 155 million. Do you have a recommendation on by how much? Did you get into that? I see you said 59 million is what they could do without, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, are you saying that they could do another 59 million without damaging bond?
We didn't
rating?
go that far in the
You didn't?
analysis.
Okay.
We just said there's
room.
capacity within their self-imposed rules to do more. So I think it's really a discussion with the county executive of how much more, and some of those things kind of interplay with each other. So, there's, go ahead.
Yeah, the 59 million piece pertains to their, it's the B component of their overlays.
Okay. And I guess, would FBAC welcome partnering with us in that, or if perhaps you haven't had an opportunity to?
Absolutely.
All right. Because I certainly think that should be a goal of this board going forward. Thank you again.
Janie?
Thank you. Excellent report. Really, really appreciate it. And I think your recommendations, all of them, are right on. So thanks. Questions that I have, not on your recommendations, just how we're going to handle it. First of all, the map of Tysons is very enlightening. And one of the things that I continue to ask of the Board of Supervisors, which they don't like to hear, is that with their plans to dramatically increase employment at Tysons, and of course they say, well, everybody who works at Tysons are going to live at Tysons. Well, I'm sorry, I don't think that's going to work that way. And I continue to see pressure in all the schools surrounding it. And we put out projections, are they going to hold, are they not going to hold? And sort of the McLean Pyramid, it's the Haycock, it's the Chesterbrook, it's the Freedom Hill, that whole piece of that. And on the one hand, I hear that increase in, well, first of all, the rents, what they are building as residential in Tysons is very expensive. And who knows who's going to really live there. So we're just all kind of waiting to see what happens. But all the neighborhoods around it are all turning over. And they are great places to live, whether you work at Tysons or downtown or Reston or Dulles, you're close to Metro, you're inside the Beltway. I mean, they are wonderful places to live and raise a family. So period. So whoever decides to live in the high-rise, very expensive apartments at Tysons, as long as there's more employment, we're going to see more people. So I guess as we just kind of continue to watch that, and the message that I keep hearing from the Board of Supervisors is that the planned expansion in that area will serve only the people who live right within Tysons. And nobody believes that. So I guess as we try to figure out what we're going to do with Longfellow, with McLean, with Cooper, with Langley, with everybody that surrounds that, obviously, at least I'm taking with a grain of salt, who's going to populate, who's going to live in those, redevelopment continues. Houses keep turning over. We have a huge international market. People come sight unseen to live in that quadrant, which is fine, but so that we can plan for it. Do any of you have any other crystal ball as to how to best continue to keep our eye on that so we are prepared as best we can for that whole region? We don't, obviously families make the decisions that they're going to make, and it's just very hard to predict. Any help?
I think the main thing that we all need to do is keep our eye on it and watch what happens as the next generation starts having children and whether they're happy to live in high rises instead of backyards. So we don't know. And I think the only way, that's why we wanted to go and look and see what is happening over in Arlington and other places that have similar kinds of buildings that we're putting into Tysons. And that's where we got some validation that the projections today seem like they're okay. If you build this type of building, you'll probably get this kind of student yield. But we don't know. So I think we just need to watch it.
Right.
We also need to maintain our flexibility with our boundaries.
Yes, I agree. And I'm very pleased with the recommendation when we have the boundary locator, warn people this, 5 years from now, it could be different. Just as I'm sure, some of us are aware of what's happening with Mount Daniels and Falls Church City. They're struggling mightily to accommodate their students. I feel really sorry for them. But again, I am not sure that, on the one hand, we can see what new housing yields, but as housing turns over, that's a different projection. And that's what I'm concerned about.
Yeah, and that's where our student data system's going to really help us too. We can keep a very close watch on what is evolving. Go ahead, Charlie.
One other member and I visited with the Arlington County folks, and the office of their planner is right behind Shirlington, and that's on a small scale, very similar to Tysons. And they said there are a lot more kids in that Shirlington, 6- and 7-story buildings than they thought. Now they're handling it, but that's the type of development that we're similar to in Tysons on a grander scale. That Shirlington was going to be all young people going to restaurants, and it's got kids.
And then likewise, their accuracy is lower than ours in certain areas. But one of the things that Charlie brings up that's an excellent point, when we go around Haycock, for example.
Yes, that's my fear.
I go further down that little road, Westmoreland, and back in there, and next thing you know, I'm at Nottingham Elementary in Arlington County Public Schools, and I see the trailers that they're bringing on top of the trailers that they had already brought into that school that they hadn't accounted for. So there's some stuff going on both in the high-rise area and also in the residential with the backyarders.
Exactly. It's the residential.
So it's a combination
Right,
that we have to
exactly.
keep our eye on to the point that was
Yeah.
made.
Right, great. Thank you. Well done.
So Megan, sorry to catch you.
No. I was just, my iPad's about to lose its power. Just echoing everybody's appreciation, again, the dedication and the time that you all spend with FPAC, it's greatly appreciated. Some of us on the board have been trying to get a subcommittee of the school board to be focusing on facilities. And so in the meantime, we know we're in great hands in terms of the collaboration and the work you do with Mr. Plattenberg and his team. And so my appreciation extends to him and Dr. Garza as well. I really think you're a model for how we can take very engaged, knowledgeable citizens and enrich the work that FCPS does. So it's appreciated. I think you're certainly hearing from my colleagues that Tysons has all of us very keyed in to the development there. And my first reaction when I saw Pimmitt Hills was absolutely, and the question is, how best to utilize the space, but I know for a time already, when we've looked at what's going to be happening in Tysons, it's just a matter of when, not if, for Pimmitt Hills. And, since that's not in my Braddock district at all, but just looking at that map itself, it looks like it might be a middle school need, simply because of proximity to where you have a bunch of elementary schools there. But obviously, between Mr. Plattenberg's team and FPAC, you guys will continue to do the intensive work. I want to echo what my colleague, Ms. Evans, said, which is absolutely whatever we can do as a powerful collective voice of the school board on the bond levels. And, again, I would recommend that if FPAC drafts the position and works with Mr. Plattenberg on it, then, send it to Chairman Evans and, let's actively promote that as soon as possible. I'm glad we're all talking about today, but I don't want to miss whatever timing we have, and if it's critical, time sensitive, let's get on that sooner rather than later in front of them. But otherwise, I am thinking about just where we are in the district as a whole, and I hope as we go forward into this next year, something that harkens to what Ms. Schultz tends to talk about a lot in a proactive way, which is where do we have empty seats, and where can we utilize the space that we have in buildings so that we can reduce our reliance on mobile units or modular units and cottages / trailers. So I think that's, continues to be the challenge, and I guess I would just encourage you, along with your work with Mr. Plattenberg, that I believe that the support from the board in saying, we need to continue and identify where we have underutilized space and try to capture it better. So otherwise, thank you so much. And to my Braddock appointee, Charlie, so great to see you. And thank you for agreeing to serve another term. Greatly appreciated, and especially the institutional knowledge you bring to FPAC.
Thank you. Il-Young, please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. And first of all, Mr. Plattenberg, as I was asking you on Thursday night, that we are going to have, hopefully sooner than later, about what the board's vision is about the trailers we have in the school system, where the board feels that it will serve all of us well to eliminate or at least drastically reduce the number of trailers, serving how many students? 20,000 students on a daily basis, which is larger than many of the school districts. And so I would love to have that discussion. I think I've been asking to have that discussion for some time. And again, I'm hoping to do that before I retire sometime. With that said, this one goes to the FPAC. Thank you for looking into a county that limit policies. Do you concur that those two A and B, that 3% and 10%, both of them are required to maintain AAA bond rating, or that was beyond your analysis?
That's beyond placing a judgment on the county's self-imposed limitations is beyond what we were trying to do. What we were trying to do is to say, given those, is there room for more money to be made available? And we think there is, and maybe even sufficient to meet our needs.
Yeah, I could see that. Even with their current self-imposed, limitation of an annual maximum of $300 million, the division between, because we get 155, and then this is the first year they added another $13 million from their operating budget, not the bond money. Right. That 155, I think Mrs. Schur, tried to bring that up earlier today, with that division, that distribution of a bond capacity. Do you think that is fair? Because at least, from the a number of square footage of buildings, us, school system having 200 school buildings, right, plus administrative buildings, that right, we have many more buildings to take care of. I mean, their county side may have more land on the park authority side than we do have a large tract of lands everywhere too, but it's more buildings that need to be maintained and built. So that 155 versus perhaps theirs could be 120, whether that's a fair division. Have you had a chance to look into that?
I can tell you, when I attended the Infrastructure Finance Committee meetings, and those kinds of questions came up, like what does the county have to deal with and what do we have to deal with? It's a very difficult and complex comparison because county has roads and sidewalks and buildings and lots of things, and we're more focused on our buildings and our land. So it's very hard to just compare number of square feet of buildings and square feet of buildings. My suspicion is that we should probably be getting more, but I can't quantify that with real numbers given the apples to oranges kind of stuff that we have that has to be maintained.
So are you saying that they use a lot of their bond money to build the roads as well, use that? My understanding. Sidewalks?
That's
understanding different from my understanding.
Yeah. Just from listening to their presentations about what they do with their bond money, it was a broader range of things than what we do. So I would not disagree that we should be getting more, but I don't have any facts to say clearly that we should.
Then I'm going to ask Mr. Plettenberg if you can find me a link on the county website somewhere. If those links are not available, then make a request to the county about how they are using their bond money, where the money is actually going. It's whether it's a road, as you say, sidewalk, or just the buildings, because they have a lot of new, very, very new administrative buildings. I mean, we are housing a lot of our employees, not just the students, very, very old buildings. Thank you.
So Dahlia, please. And I'm going to tell people we are wrapping up at 6:30 to stay on schedule, so just take that into account. Thank you.
I will be brief. It's a question, I don't know if it's for Jeff and your team or FPAC. I guess the question I've had as we look at the formulas, and I know I sat through a developer telling us their formula for how many kids they expected, and it didn't seem feasible, how few they had. I know we look at the types of buildings now, whether they're single unit and all of that. Would it be helpful? I'm thinking about where I live, older condos, lower price range, a lot more families are moving in there. Would it be helpful to have additional, I guess, factors in there to help us have a better sense of the number of kids that may be in a community?
Well, that's a very good question. It gets back to student yields, and we did, if you recall, Mr. Boken gave an excellent, and Amy's team gave an excellent presentation on the student yield formula calculations and what we do. There are, to your point about older facilities, there are different metrics that are used for those because we base it upon experiential data. We are struggling a little bit with what I know has been requested by Ms. Evans is ones that are beyond 20 years old and they've gone through a couple different recycles, and then when a neighborhood comes back in. But it's not unlike what we've talked about with the high-rise that we're seeing, what we're talking about in Arlington with some of the redevelopments around Haycock, where old houses, older homes are being knocked down and rebuilt, much like through the town of Vienna. When you drive through there, and for some reason, there are younger families that are moving into those newly built homes on old lots and so forth. So what we do is Greg and his team do a really good job under Amy's supervision of forecasting that yield. But with the shift that has been happening, with the type of construction that's been going on, we do have to continually monitor that and to see where our yields need to be tweaked a little bit. I don't know if Mr. Snead has anything he wants to add to that, but we've been doing a pretty darn good job about systematically identifying where we can tweak it.
But do you feel that, I guess, the county formula is also updated the way ours is?
So remember, we have two yields that we produce. One for proffers, because we've had this conversation, is we have to use a yield that is uniform. So it doesn't matter where the development is. When we calculate a proffer, it's a uniform yield. We do monitor neighborhood by neighborhood yields. So it is different everywhere, and I know you asked a question about if it was in your neighborhood or if it was in another district. Yes, we have the ability to do that, and the housing types certainly also generate separate yields. So for instance, when Janie was talking about new units in Tysons, typically when you have a new development such as that, you would have a lower yield. As the units are grow in age, the costs become a little more reasonable. It's usually 15, 20 years, then you'd start to see younger kids move in there. So it's very complicated. We'd be happy, as Jeff said, Mr. Boken is very experienced with this. We'd be happy to come back and address this.
No, so I guess would you say that our yield formula that's really monitoring neighborhood by neighborhood is maybe a little bit more precise than the proffer that's across the board?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, yes. Yes, it is.
Elizabeth, please.
First of all, I definitely needed the laugh that we now know that multi-dwelling units produce more kids than we previously thought. I was like, okay, I've gotten some sanity back after 6 years. My question, and I don't see it here anywhere, and this is the, the tale of 2 counties or 3 counties or 4 counties, is that, we have the map up there that has the dots on, I guess that's the version of a heat map with a, yeah, and I guess that's where bodies are coming, where kids are coming, and where we think we're going to need, not bodies. It's getting late. But where capacity requirements, thank you, where there's going to be more people needed. The problem is that doesn't address something that, I bring up perennially, which is the space per student and the overcrowding at the building level. And it's all well and good to say, oh, well, we need more space. But when you have a staffing requirement that drives teeny tiny little classrooms, yeah, you're going to need more space because you only have 19 kids in a classroom. And I'm in an area of the county where I have 30. And I have the least amount of square feet per kid in higher percentage of elementary schools than any other place. And it's a problem because what it says is that it's okay to sardine kids in if you live in a certain zip code, but it's not anyplace else. And then we spend more of our capital needs adding capacity where we've taken staffing and made tiny little classrooms. And where's the correlation on the session we had earlier today, which is the return on investment. And so this is a real problem because what it says is that we approach providing for children's education and educational opportunities in a way that discounts space, it discounts access, it makes kids go on substantially further transportation rides, which when you have parents that are working and you're in the western end of the county, they're already on the latest bell schedules quite often. So they're starting school the latest as elementary school students. They're getting out the latest. They're on the longest bus rides. And their parents are, the most impacted. So I don't see any accommodation in any of this that says, okay, you know what? We have different sets of problems, not that they're worse, better than other sets of problems, but they are still problems. And it's as if we're not acknowledging this other set of issues of high volume classrooms, what that does to teachers, where teachers have to live, what parents have to do. And so it's like the silent problem that's underneath all of this that nobody really wants to talk about. No place for special ed programs in any of my schools, which means that the special ed kids have to be bused all the further to a center for assistance. Crickets. That's.
Well, I know you're talking to FPAC with that question, but just to give you a response is when you cover such a wide array of topics, it really it's not that it's complicated, it's just complex. Because the complexities associated with that, yeah, they are real. When you have a special needs requirement for a student that has not only a teacher but also an assistant, because of the needs to meet that student, it does take up additional space. We've presented in our discussions about facilities about the general ed student versus the special ed student and so forth in graphic detail to show the differences or the disparity of space requirement for that. It does impact. Special programs, so to your point. Special programs, for example, AAP. When you have an AAP center in a regular general ed school, and that general ed school is reaching upwards overcrowding, and it's a favorable AAP center with a lot of students attending, it does create a situation where you minimize the amount of square foot per child. So those things are a broad range of topics that can be delved into and gone down and articulated, and it would take quite a bit. It would be an exercise that would take quite a bit of analysis and so forth. Not that it's impossible to identify the parameters to do those types of things because of what I just articulated that we know about, but it does make a difference in different parts of the county where program offerings are made. And like you said about busing and transporting special education students out of a school, looking at that pyramid centrically, I know this board's tackled more of those issues about trying to provide pyramid-centric provisions. And in fact, we've recognized that in our comprehensive, in our CIP as a goal. So there are the beginnings of that, if you will, the foundation to go ahead and further look into it. With everything else that have been going on, it's like when you get the alligators nipping at you, you kind of forget the fact that your original task was to drain the pond, and our capacity issues have been what our foremost attention has been. But that was an FPAC question, though.
You're right.
So FPAC
Well,
wanna
not
answer?
really. I just want to thread the needle for my colleagues for a second here. And we've had some nexus corollaries presented to us today that come clear right here. And the issues that exist in my district and to some degree Mr. Wilson's district are different than every place else in the county. But they have to do with strategic, capital, budget, return on investment, spending, and when you put exponentially more students per square foot into a building, it does things like affect, I don't know, your compensation study issues, your return on investment, you on building capacity areas in areas where your classrooms are the smallest, therefore your cost per student are going to be exponentially higher because you keep adding more capital space and more staffing where you're not putting as many students into the building. And there is a disproportionality problem in my area that we never get to talk about, that is at the heart of all of these issues before us today, in the strategic plan, in the budget, in the facilities issue that's presented to us tonight. And we've got to come to some kind of a resolution on, if we're only going to solve the problems in certain areas of the county, then we have a disproportionate representation on this board. And it is a problem. It's a problem for my teachers, for my families, for my students. It's a transportation problem in my end of the county. So it impacts things like extracurricular time and keeping kids active. I've talked with Jeff Anderson. It's really nice. We talk about safe routes to school. I have whole sections of my district where there's no way for a kid to even walk to school if they wanted to, never mind ride a bike. So we're going to have to find a way to address it. It's been this unspoken topic for, frankly, years at this point, but we're bubbling up yet again another report by FPAC, and once again it's not mentioned, and we've got to find a way to solve some of these problems.
Elizabeth, thank you for that comment. May I suggest that that's something that we actually bring up in the context of the retreat next week, and how to raise concerns that each of us have regarding specific issues and having them addressed? Because I'm not sure that's really something FPAC can address.
No, what I would suggest, Elizabeth, is that Ian, who's your FPAC member, and one of the three of us meet with you and see what we can do from our side to help shed some light on the issues and at least frame them up so people can understand.
Are there any other questions? Great. That brings this session to an end, and I don't.
Are there next steps?
We don't do next steps for annual reports. That's why I didn't do that.
I would like to comment. I just want to thank the three of you particularly for your involvement with FPAC, and you as well. Thank you. I know for at least my little over 3 years here, you've been involved consistently, and that I think is somewhat unique for a volunteer, a community volunteer, to stay that engaged at the level you have been for consecutive years. So just want to thank you all for your continued work and support, and thank you for working so closely with our team. We really do value the feedback and the input and what you contribute to this work, so thank you.
So we are now scheduled to have a governance committee work session. Mr. Moon, did you want to?
Yes, I want to ask my colleagues of their thoughts about this. Do we have both councils? We have Mr. Foster. We are looking for a couple more. They're on their way. We expect them at 7 o'clock, correct? 7 o'clock. Whether board members want to have dinner break starting right now, or at least take care of one of the three items of the governance.
Asked if we could get started without them.